John Rose is here with us. He's on the Murphy Show hotline. Congressman John Rose joining us to talk about activity going on in Washington, D.C. this week. I'm promising to be a joyful warrior, John, so we might disagree on this matter of TikTok and the government's involvement, but I promise that we'll disagree in a pleasant way. How are you, John?
I'm great. Thanks for having me as a guest this afternoon.
It's absolutely always a pleasure. Before we get into the politics of the day, I do have this. I promised a loyal listener that I would ask you a question. Do you have anyone in your family, like a mother or a grandmother, that used to teach school?
Yes, actually, my grandmother taught school, and my sister, brother-in-law, school teachers as well.
Gordonsville High School?
I had an aunt. I have an aunt who taught at Gordonsville School.
Okay.
She actually taught first and second grade. My sister taught there for a while. So my grandmother, that was before consolidation, so she taught at a small country school in the county, not at Gordonsville.
Well, I had a listener, when they found out that you were coming on, said, Matt, would you do me a favor and ask John Rose if his mother or grandmother was a teacher at Gordonsville High School? If so, she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. So I bet we're talking about the same person.
Yeah, and I'm leaving this out. My mom did teach there. I'm not having a brain block there. My mom taught home economics and English at Gordonsville High School. So that's who your listener is talking about.
Well, listener,
Betty Williams Rose.
They wanted you to know that your mom is a wonderful lady, and I bet you already knew that, but they just wanted to express that to you.
Sure.
So, John, talk to me about your rationale. Here's where I'm at on this. I'm willing to be convinced that there is a compelling national security interest in the government saying, I understand the threat that China poses. I don't like any more than anybody that, a lot of the components that goes into our pharmaceuticals come from China. Most of the precious earth metals that we use for electronics comes from China. I mean, all of those things are concerning and bothersome. I just need to know why this is of such a concern that we would go so far to shut a private business down unless they make some changes in their business model. Talk to me about it.
Well, so the concern obviously with TikTok is that ByteDance, which owns TikTok, it's pretty clearly is controlled or forced by the Chinese Communist Party to share the data that it collects on Americans. And as we have learned, despite their attempts at some junctures to mislead us on this, much of that data is kept in China. And the law in China is that ByteDance has to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to that data. So we have the data of literally 175 plus million Americans that is accessible by the Chinese Communist Party, and this is not a new issue. We've known this for some time, and so the legislation does not shut TikTok down. It simply requires that ByteDance divest itself of the controlling ownership of TikTok, and I will just say the evidence is pretty overwhelming that the Chinese have malign interests with respect to the control of this information. And so this is really about protecting Americans and their privacy from, a foreign adversary that has made it clear what their intentions are relative to the United States. And so, they have adopted this view of total war and their approach to the United States. And we don't have to speculate about the likelihood that they would use this information if they found it to be advantageous to do so. So again, the bill doesn't ban TikTok. It simply requires that ByteDance divest itself and thereby divesting any control by the Chinese Communist Party.
I mean, yeah, but obviously it's what you're saying is that the bill doesn't ban TikTok unless TikTok sells to someone else. So, it's effectively the same. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, if TikTok remains in its current form under its current ownership, then you will no longer be able to access TikTok in the United States, right?
That is true. If they refuse to divest, then that would be true. And now we see this across a range of industries. And I will just say, Matt, I was trained in college as an economic student to believe in free trade and open markets, and certainly, as you know from the positions I've taken on other issues, I believe very strongly in our First Amendment rights as secured by the Constitution. And and so, have spoken out actively to support First Amendment rights. So I don't see this, the intention here is not to suppress speech, but rather to protect speech. And, just this past week, as we got lots of calls from folks about TikTok, we learned that the TikTok app was essentially forcing its customers, they were essentially forcing their customers to make calls to their members of Congress. And, that's obviously compelled speech is the same thing as, silenced speech. And so, they're not really in a position to call foul on First Amendment grounds if they're going to force their users to express certain opinions, and which is essentially what they were doing.
Well, I don't want to get off on a tangent on that, but nobody's forcing anyone to use TikTok.
That's right, and we're not saying that you can't. We're saying that as long as the Chinese Communist Party has the influence that they have over TikTok, that it is a national security issue for the United States.
There are plenty of things that Americans do that we recognize are potentially negative things that they do in their lives, but we allow them to do that because we believe in the freedom that we enjoy in the United States of America to do things unfettered by a government that would dictate that they must do this or that thing. The reason the government is involved in this case, it's my understanding, John, is because of the compelling national security threat that exists. Tell me what that threat is.
Well, so without saying more than I can, I would say, what is clear is that the Chinese Communist Party intends to use the information that they gather about Americans to their advantage. And so that could come in the form of extorting Americans. Could also come in the form, though, of attempting to influence opinions of Americans by feeding them information. This is the same fear, arguably, that we have with other social media platforms where they're interfering with, the freedom of Americans to communicate with one another, or they're pushing them in a certain direction. And so because we know the Chinese Communist Party has asserted that they plan to utilize those, that power to their advantage, we don't have to speculate about that. And so this, of course, only applies to 4 countries that are believed to be actively contemplating being adversaries or are current adversaries of the United States, either directly or through proxies. So China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia that have, obviously shown adverse intent toward the United States and the people of the United States. So, as you know, of course, it passed overwhelmingly, and members of Congress obviously were well educated about the threat and the threat matrix that that has been identified, and the Energy and Commerce Committee passed it unanimously out of committee. I don't have to tell you how rare that is in Congress. To have the degree of bipartisan support for something like this.
Well, John, so, if you want to get Congress uniformly behind something, tell them that the government's going to take control over certain aspects of our daily life. But here's the thing, though, John. We're friends. I consider us friends. I consider you an ally in the cause for freedom and liberty in the United States. So I'm not coming at you when I say this, but it feels to me like all of our Congress people are saying, trust us. Y'all have lost that trust of the American people, either through COVID-19 or through the malfeasance on the part of the FBI or through the misuse of FISA warrants. I'm sorry that y'all have lost that trust, but you have. I'm not going to sit by and simply say, okay, I'm going to trust the government when they tell us that there's a real... Why can't you tell us what this national security threat is?
Well, I don't think there's any great secret here. Again, it's it's disseminating false information that the TikTok platform can be used for, and then it's the collecting of personal information on millions of Americans.
So wait a minute, I don't mean to interrupt you, John, but isn't Facebook doing that too?
They are, but they're not under the control of the Chinese Communist Party.
But under that spirit, why would not the government say that they should shut Facebook down?
Well, again, because you don't have an adverse interest like the Chinese government that is directing the activities of Facebook. Now, I grant you raise concerns, but Facebook and the other the other social media platforms that are not controlled by malign foreign interests, they are subject to to the, competitive forces of the marketplace. And so if they misuse the information they have, and I will tell you, I think we obviously should be very careful in watching what those other social media platforms are doing, and we should be careful in watching what the government is doing to compel, them to do certain things. So, for example, last year, I was very outspoken about the New York Post reporter Emma Jo Morris and her reporting about Hunter Biden's laptop that was frankly suppressed by the U.S. government and by major social media platforms. I spoke up about that. And as we've discussed in the past, I'm very concerned about the renewal of FISA. I voted against the temporary extension, and I very strongly believe that the authorities under FISA should be limited by requiring the government to obtain a warrant when they seek your private information. And I think they should also be restricted. The government should be in purchasing your private information from private sector players who are gathering that information. And ultimately, I favor allowing Americans to own their personal information and not allowing it to be owned by the social media platforms. So, which would be, of course, broader approaches to this same issue. But in the case of China and Russia, North Korea, Iran, I think we have the added problem that their governments are actively averse to American interests. And so we just simply can't let a platform like TikTok be owned by one of those.
I find it fascinating that this is the hill that we finally decided that we're going to die on when it comes to China. After allowing China the power over precious earth metals, after allowing China the power over so much of our pharmaceutical industry, after allowing power to China the ability to purchase almost, I think it's 400,000 acres of farmland in the United States. And I know that you're probably against all of these things too, John, so I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I understand the threat that China poses. I also understand the threat that exists that our own government of the United States of America will limit our ability to freely communicate on the internet when given the ability. And that's kind of what I'm fighting back against is I need to see the real. In order to hand to the government a certain portion of my liberties, I want to see in exchange why I'm doing that and what specific threat or reasoning or rationale the government has. And I'm getting a lot of, there's a lot of threats out there and China. And I understand that there are certain things you can't say. And I'm not asking you to violate your oath. I'm not doing that. But you understand our concerns as the population of Tennessee looks at this and wonders, what could be so grave that they would decide to shut down a platform that's utilized by 175 million people in this country?
Sure, and I understand that, and I would tell you this isn't the first area, but it may be the broadest in terms of its touch to the American people. So we do limit the export of critical information and technologies and equipment to countries like China as well. We do keep a careful eye on our reliance on them for critical materials and infrastructure as well. You're right to be skeptical about the degree to which we've come to rely on them for not only pharmaceuticals but the precursor chemicals for pharmaceuticals and in a number of other areas, to be sure. And I think you're going to see, a continuing pushback on those fronts. Again, I believe in free trade and free and open markets, but with respect to China in particular and some of our other foreign adversaries as well, we know that they intend to use our reliance on them to harm us. And so we have to take a different view there. And so I think you're going to see, as we move forward, continued pushback against China and our reliance on them, not only for critical minerals but for other critical supplies in our broader supply chains. And frankly, ultimately, I don't think we should allow them to compete on a level playing field with the rest of the world in terms of trade, because they are manipulating that system. So, if, in my own view, 25 years ago when we gave them most favored nation trading status and welcomed them into the World Trade Organization, the belief then, of course, was that they would liberalize their policies and democratize. But we've learned that that's not what they plan to do. That's not what they intend to do. They instead are planning to use the advantages that they got from being kind of welcomed into the World Trade Organization and being given a level playing field, they are using that against us, and they're manipulating markets to gain, an outsized control over those markets. And so in this case, I think a unique situation because they do have access to so much sensitive information on Americans, and the belief that there's no question that they plan to use that information. And so TikTok should be able to go on. I think it would be overwhelming in their interest to divest their ownership there and allow TikTok to continue to be successful in North America, in the United States market, but not under Chinese Communist Party control.
Why doesn't the American government buy it?
Well, I think we don't want the American government owning, a social media platform
apparently,
like that for all the obvious reasons.
But John, if you're making ownership decisions effectively, right? You understand my point? That if the United States government,
I understand the concern.
I mean, all right. So look, we've beaten the horse, and it's all well and good. Once again, I'm here to reflect some of the concerns that I hear from the general public, and I'm here, as a voice of liberty, and I know that you are too. So we'll continue the conversation down the road. What about, real quick before I let you go? Are you familiar with Temu? Or Temu, the online marketplace that's owned by China?
Yes, the fast fashion industry. Which
should the government be shutting down that website, because all of that stuff comes from China? It's owned by the government.
It is a concern, and one of the principal concerns with Temu and Shein and other fast fashion and fast product companies is that they are primarily succeeding because they're taking advantage of what's called the de minimis exception to our shipping and customs laws, which allow small dollar value products to be shipped into the country. And so we are taking a look at that because it frankly gives them an opportunity to bypass Customs and Border Enforcement and customs inspections and avoid tariffs and avoid other export controls. So, the concern there we have is not only the economic impact that that's having on American industry and business, but also the potential for evading customs inspections and getting illicit products into the country, and the potential that those products have been manufactured in some cases using slave or forced labor from places like, the Xinjiang autonomous zone where the Uyghurs are concentrated. And so those issues are on the table as well. Again, we see this from the Chinese government, that they are very, very carefully taking advantage of our free and open markets. And as you've expressed, I mean, as Americans, we want the best value for the dollar, and we want to be able to access the products that we want. And so we tend to have a more open mindset about these things. But we have to understand the Chinese interest is to use those things to their advantage. And they, in the case of the Chinese Communist Party, they are very carefully doing so.
John, you have well represented your position. I appreciate you coming on and explaining it to the listening audience and to the people of your 6th Congressional District. Thank you for your time, and I want you to have a wonderful weekend. Have a happy St. Patty's Day, and we'll talk again very soon, my friend.
Thanks. I just want to say, I'm an unapologetic supporter for Donald Trump, and very pleased that we now have a rematch of the 2020 election. I think we're going to see the president put forward a great platform.
Well, I share that belief, and I share that excitement over what we're going to see over the next several months, and it should be a good time heading toward November. Thank you, John.
We're going to make America great again.
Take care. There's John Rose, representing the 6th Congressional District of Tennessee, and a Trump man through and through.
Why can you not just use a VPN and download TikTok and use it that way? They're going to stop nothing. And this bill gives the president, it gives the executive branch the authority to define a website.
Define foreign adversaries.
Yes.
So the bill, if passed as written and passed by the House in the Senate and signed by the president, would give the president of the United States the authorization to define what a foreign adversary is, or what an adversary, a national security threat is. And in doing so, it gives the president, the executive branch, the authority to shut things down at their determination that what you are doing is a national security threat. In other words, it would give the president the authority, if they determined that we were a threat, to shut us down online, to shut this radio station. This is not being hyperbolic. This is in the bill, that it would give him the ability to do that, which is why I'm against it, which is why I'm beating this dead horse, as some are calling it.